from the audience. Or you can use it to walk around, or you could lower this one, use this one, or you could stand on your riser and use this one. This one's on too. So, all right.
Okay, so that probably should be.
All right. This right here.
This was sort of just like our contingency.
Okay. Perfect.
This one is really just in case something goes wrong here. We already have something else set up.
Is this one on?
It's not, but
Oh, okay. That's fine. No, that's fine. That's fine. All right. You ready? Yep. I'm ready. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Lana Castro. I'm director of the Massachusetts Moriches Shirley Community Library, and it's so nice to see everyone here this morning. I heard there were people here at 8:45. That's impressive. So thank you so much for spending your morning with us. So today we've got some guest speakers, and we're gonna talk about a really underrepresented time in our shared history. We lots of times hear all the same names and incidences in history books, and lots of times women are very overlooked in that, and we all know that they played an important part in our shared history, and lots of times it's just not talked about. So we're going to change that today. We're going to have some excellent speakers, and it's going to all be about women, and I see mostly women in the audience today, so thank you for coming. And the men, thank you for being here too, so we appreciate you. So their stories are powerful, and they deserve to be remembered and told. So thank you for being here today and being a part of that. I also want to take a moment to recognize the incredible work of our reference librarian and archivist here at the Massachusetts Moriches Shirley Community Library, Maura Feeney. I really can't say enough wonderful things about her. I worked with Maura years ago at the Montauk Library, and she has really brought a level of professionalism and just expanded our program, and she's taking care of the art exhibits in the library, done a wonderful job with that. And this event is really a reflection of her passion and dedication to preserving local history and bringing it to the community and making us all aware. And I appreciate her for that, and I think she's just brought a wonderful aspect to this library that we really didn't have before. So thank you, Maura. So again, thank you for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Maura. She's going to introduce our speakers today, and I hope everyone leaves today feeling inspired and enlightened and connected more to the community and our history. So enjoy the event.
Can you hear me? I don't want to do any. Is it okay? Okay, good. I'm going to go very quickly. Actually, this conference is going to be very fast. We're going to go sort of like a bullet train as I've described it. Recently, a very good colleague of mine and I went to a conference that was absolutely excellent. Each speech was better than the next. The lunchtime took place. It was a wonderful lunch. And then the last part of the conference was going to take place after the lunch, and we both looked at each other and said, I need a nap. And so we are trying to get everything done. In the morning time, we're going to break. After Diane is finished, we're going to have cake and ice cream, and everyone will be able to get up and walk around. Natalie asked me to keep it short. This is all I'm going to say. I cannot imagine how many glass ceilings you broke in order to reach the position of professor at Hofstra University. But all I can say is all of us are indebted to you for the very hard work that you have done for women's history in Long Island. This is the book, Women in Long Island's Past. We have it in the local history room. We have it here. A lot of libraries have it on Long Island. It is a history of eminent ladies and everyday lives by Natalie Naylor. Natalie, Madam Mighty Might, I'm going to ask everyone to just, if you can, stand up and give her an ovation as she reaches the podium. After you, Madam.
Thank you, everyone. Oops, let's get, I'm better at some things than finding this library, so I had some trouble. Anyway, thank you, Maura, and thank everyone for coming, and the community library for organizing the conference and making it so welcoming. When I was teaching women's history at Hofstra, the first day of class I would have a quiz, gets their attention. And I would ask them to name 10 women in American history and then say what they did. I think my students averaged 3. Betsy Ross, who didn't make the first American flag, Martha Washington, and their mother. And our mothers are important, ladies. I used to laugh, but they're important for us. And then I would ask if they would have any trouble naming 10 men important in American history. And of course, no, you've got all the presidents and generals and so on. Gloria Steinem once said, "Women have always been an equal part of history. They just haven't been they have always been an equal part of the past. They have not always been a part of history." The war on American soil provided opportunities for heroism by ordinary people, and that included women. Am I standing in the way of you seeing that behind me? Okay, that's good. Because let's see if I'm working this right. No, not yet. Okay. But I really, this is strange. Okay. Because I can't see anything behind me. But, okay. I think this should be off to the side, but anyway, I can't take the time. Near my hometown of Peekskill in upstate New York, there in Continental Village, where Patriot troops had been during the Revolution, this monument was erected in 1921. The plaque on the stone that you see, I know you can't read it, but it says, "In memory of the mothers of the Revolution who watched and prayed while our fathers fought that we might be free." And that's the end of the quote. And I've always appreciated that recognition of women. It claimed to be, and maybe still is, the only monument to the women of the Revolution. But my goal today is to prove that the mothers and the other women did more than watch and pray during the war. I'm not about to argue that women won the war or that they played a major role, but most of the accounts of the Revolution largely ignore what they did. The exceptions on Long Island, Sally Townsend, Nancy Strong, or Anna Strong, they're the only ones who are usually mentioned. And I'll come to them, but let me say that their role has been exaggerated, romanticized, distorted. And if you've watched the PBS, the Turn series, which is now being repeated on PBS, that's true certainly there. Watch Ken Burns' documentary if you want a good history of the Revolution. In the 1700s, including during the Revolutionary War, Women's sphere was the home. Did that change? No. Let me. What am I doing wrong? Do I have to?
So you needed which
No.
next one here? This one.
Okay.
Do you want me to advance them for you?
Wait on. That was. Yeah. Thank you, Jerry.
This thing's just a little piece.
The official records, the newspapers, historical accounts overwhelmingly report on the activities of men. They were the ones who fought in battles and skirmishes, and only occasionally are there women's names. But the soldiers and other patriots and loyalists, be they, whose names are in the history books, they had wives and mothers and daughters who were often affected by the revolution. And they were involved as well in the British occupation of the island. And so I'll turn to specific examples. In the mid-1960s, the English Parliament enacted taxes on the American colonists in the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts. The economic boycotts organized by the colonists in response would not have been effective without the women who found substitutes for tea, wove homespun rather than buy British cloth, and they took out their spinning wheels and wove homespun. The Boston newspaper in 1760 reported, and I'm quoting, 3 young ladies at Huntington on Long Island, namely Ermina, Letitia, and Sabrina, having met together, agreed to try their dexterity at the spinning wheel. Accordingly, the next morning, they sit themselves down and, like the virtuous woman, put their hand to the spindle and held the distaff. At evening, they had 26 skeins of good linen yarn, each skein containing 4 ounces, all of which were the effects of that day's work only. End of quote in the newspaper, although they went on to say, the ladies, while they vie with each other in skill and industry in their profitable employment, may vie with the men in contributing to the preservation and prosperity of their country, and equally share in contributing to the preservation and prosperity, equally share in the honor of it. The newspaper urged Boston women to follow the example of these Long Island women. Next slide. Mary Cooper. We have her diary. This is the only image we have of her. That's it. We have her diary published for the years 1768 to 1773. There's not a word in it about politics. Of course, it ends before the revolution, or at least what we have of it ends before the revolution. Maybe there would have been. But at that point in time, she was not involved. Next slide. The population of Long Island, including Queens and Kings County, was 28,000 just before the war. Nearly half, 47%, were in Suffolk County. Kings County, today's Brooklyn, had less than 15% of the island's population. Very different from today, obviously. And Queens, that included today's Nassau, 38% of the population. Long Island, like many of the middle colonies, was divided in political views. We sometimes forget that the American Revolution was a civil war. It is usually said that Suffolk County was overwhelmingly patriot, while the majority of the population in Kings County, which was smallest in numbers, were Loyalists, while Queens was very much divided. In fact, Patriots in the northern part of the town of Hempstead literally seceded from the southern part of the town, a decision that was confirmed after the war and split into North Hempstead and South Hempstead. After 1793, the southern part went back to its original name, town of Hempstead. The division in the Queens population on the eve of the war was not equal. Recent estimates are that a majority in Queens, 60%, were neutral or apolitical, not willing to take a stand. 27% Loyalist, and only 12% Patriot. And those percentages are based on those who publicly acknowledged or signified their allegiance, and of course refers only to the men. Next. This house is a gem. Urge you to visit it if you have not. Before the outbreak of full-fledged fighting, the New Jersey Patriot Militia came to Long Island in January 1776 to disarm the, as they called it, the disaffected, the Loyalists. And they arrested several prominent Loyalists, and one of those arrested and imprisoned for a number of months was Dr. Samuel Martin, who lived in the southwest corner of Hempstead. Samuel's father, Josiah, was in his mid-70s at that point, and in poor health. That left the household of 3 generations at Rock Hall in the hands of women. Patriot soldiers occupied the Martin home, which included Josiah's wife, Mary, his adult daughters, Betsy, Alice, and Rachel, and Betsy's 3 daughters, 5-month-old Augusta, 7-year-old Alice, and 13-year-old Mary Elizabeth Martin. Shown here 4 years earlier, in a portrait by the leading artist of the day. Mary's father had been the royal governor of North Carolina, but he and his family had to flee North Carolina, and he remained on a British ship for safety. After returning to Rock Hall, he wrote that the women had been, and I quote here, exposed to the most mortifying insults of the ruling mob, and he suffered the mortifications of being obliged to entertain all the ragamuffins who quartered in their house in January 1776. This is months before the Declaration of Independence. The women's experiences at Rock Hall was not an isolated incident. There would be many others during the war, whether perpetrated by Loyalists or Patriots. In mid-August 1776, when Patriot militia were protecting cattle on the Rockaway Peninsula, it was a woman who first alerted the men that the British were coming. Nellie Cornell, after looking out an upper window, told a Patriot officer that she saw trees rising from the ocean. That was the British fleet, bringing soldiers to Staten Island. They would be engaged in the Battle of Long Island at the end of August. This painting of the fighting at the Stone House was by a Long Island artist nearly a century later. Chappell lived in near on Artist Lake, which was named for him, today's Middle Island. And that battle was the one major battle on Long Island. And it had occurred in today's Brooklyn. So it's also called the Battle of Brooklyn. But much of the fighting took place in today's Prospect Park and Greenwood Cemetery. The battle was a defeat for the Patriots. They were greatly outnumbered, but they also were outflanked because the Jamaica Pass had been left unprotected or very inadequately guarded. That battle was would be the largest battle of the war in terms of the numbers of troops engaged. It should have been, from the British point of view, the end of the war. But General Washington evacuated most of his troops and across the East River. He was helped by the fact that there was a fog, it was raining, and the winds, and the British didn't follow up on their victory. Large numbers of the Patriot troops were killed or taken prisoners. Many Patriot officers captured in that battle were paroled in Brooklyn with private families. Women had responsibility for that and sheltering the prisoners as well. American authorities paid or were supposed to pay for their care, but many women whose names we don't know provided food to prisoners and nursed wounded soldiers without compensation. You may recall that the Quartering Act was named in the Declaration of Independence as one of the complaints against the British. And soldiers living in one's home or barns, whichever, not only meant the disruption of the household routines, but also the burden of feeding and cooking for them, whether the family was patriot or loyalist. The British then occupied the island, and many women went with their families to Connecticut. And that included the William Floyd family, near here, obviously, you know. The New York Convention of Patriots recommended that Long Islanders send as many as possible of their women, children, and slaves, together with grain and livestock, to Connecticut. They assumed that the men would be serving in the militia or the army. William Floyd, as I'm sure you know, was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. His preserved home near here is under the National Park Service, worth visiting. It's been closed for several years for renovations. It's supposed to open for the commemoration of the 250th. It may not be furnished, and it may, as I understand, be only the first floor. But anyway, Floyd's wife, Hannah, next slide, her two daughters became refugees in Connecticut. And she sent the letter that you see here to her husband. And she wrote, you can't read it, but I'll read a portion of it, quoting, "We have disagreeable news from the East End of Long Island. Our friends are very much distressed there. Their house filled with soldiers, their bread taken from them, their cattle killed 10 a day to support them. And it is the opinion of many that should they, the troops, continue there all winter, many of the inhabitants will perish for want of bread. Many of them have come off and left their families at the mercy of the enemy." End of quote from Hannah Floyd. She died in exile in Connecticut. She was only 41 years old. The Floyds, like an estimated 30% of Suffolk's population were refugees in Connecticut. And the refugees of Long Island are estimated to number nearly 5,000, more than 15% of the pre-war population of the island. And most of those refugees were from Suffolk County, where men were the most outspoken about their opposition to the British. And it wasn't easy for those refugees in Connecticut. They had only what they could take with them. And some of them did go to upstate New York or other places, but it was difficult also for the women who stayed on Long Island. They had their lives disrupted with the occupation, and their farms often destroyed as a result of the occupation. Next. Many patriot men served in the military, so their wives were left to run the farm as well as the household, whether on Long Island or as refugees in Connecticut or upstate, as I mentioned. The British recruited loyalist men to serve in the provincial corps, and those loyalist soldiers who left their wives in charge of home and farm, so that many women were actual or de facto war widows. The women had to cope with inflation, scarcity of goods, the threat of political violence. Women took over more responsibilities for the outdoor work or farms during the war. They had always been in charge inside the house and responsibilities for the kitchen garden with its herbs and vegetables. But when the war disrupted regular routines, it may have had some long-lasting effects within the domestic sphere of the family. Historians using records from other areas have concluded that there was a change in the language that men used, from my family to our family. That was not affected politically for many years, but may have changed things within individual families. Some women who left Long Island followed their husbands in the army, and not all the camp followers were prostitutes, as that term has sometimes implied or been interpreted. Next. During the bicentennial, one exhibit I attended opened with a portrait of Martha Washington, and the caption read, "The most famous camp follower during the Revolution." Because she would go during the winter months to be with her husband, and she tried to inspire the troops, if you will. Most of the prostitutes probably were with the British Army. They had the money. We know some of the British officers had mistresses. The majority of the camp followers performed essential services, support services for the soldiers. They did nursing, cooking, mending uniforms, laundering, foraging for food. Though these activities were traditional women's work, if you will, the importance of these women of the army was recognized. Both sides allocated rations, half rations to the women, quarter rations to the children who were in the camps. We have that documented for the loyalist troops who were at Lloyd's Neck on Long Island. One estimate is that the women of the army numbered 20,000 women, perhaps 20% of the size of the male Continental Army. An even larger number of women participated in local defensive combat operations. We don't have names or details for Long Island camp followers or the women of the army, nor is there any evidence that any Long Island women fought as Deborah Sampson did, disguised as a male soldier from Massachusetts. However, I want to share my favorite Revolutionary War story, though it's from New Jersey. You may be familiar with the Molly Pitcher stop on the New Jersey Turnpike. And she may be somewhat legendary, that Molly Pitchers were like G.I. Joes in World War II. There were so many, that was a kind of generic name for them. At the Battle of Monmouth, it was a very hot day, hot and humid. If the men had drunk water from the pitchers that women brought, they probably would have died of heat stroke. So that wasn't a good idea. But what the women were doing was bringing water to clean out the cannons after they were fired, so that swabbed down the cannons so that they did not explode the next firing. Very important, essential part of the war work. And some of those women, usually the wives of artillery soldiers, sometimes stepped in and took over when the men manning the positions were wounded or killed. And we have evidence of that from the Battle of Monmouth. Joseph Plum Martin, who wrote later, who was so private in the service, and wrote his memoirs later. And he was very impressed with one woman at the Battle of Monmouth. She was leaning over to the cannon, and a cannonball went between her legs. And she looked down and said, "It's a good thing it didn't go any higher, or it would have carried away more," because it went through her dress. Much has been written about various episodes of the whaleboat warfare and guerrilla raids from Connecticut, and of patriots. And one of those patriots, loyalists, kidnapped this Judge Thomas Jones from his house that you see here. It does not survive. He later wrote that, and I'm quoting again, "They robbed Mrs. Jones of her wearing apparel and took that of 2 young ladies in the house, accepting only the clothes upon their backs. Those involved," end of quote, "those involved sold the clothes and divided the proceeds." And as that example indicates, unfortunately, whaleboat warfare sometimes degenerated into plundering and stealing. Some local residents and occupying soldiers, pretending to be patriot raiders, also stole things. And sometimes that was stealing chickens, furnishings, food, almost anything that they could put their hands on. Many residents on the island buried their silver to preserve it. Even if they stayed in their homes, they were afraid of being robbed. The British did not maintain law and order during the occupation. And some of those raids were a cover for smuggling. The illicit or so-called London trade. The black market flourished on Long Island during the war. And some women and civilian men were killed in the raids. Patriot Major Benjamin Talmage's successful raid on Fort St. George in Mastic, not that far away. At that raid, one newspaper at the time reported, and I quote, "A poor woman was also fired on at another house and barbarously wounded through both breasts. The fort has not survived. The manor house has and is expected to be open this summer." Many families who stayed on Long Island during the war had lost their physicians and who were in the service, military service, and in their absence, women provided nursing and medical care. In Huntington, Long Island, Elizabeth Williams Potter had often assisted her husband and Dr. Gilbert Potter, and while he was serving in the Patriot Army, she attended the sick in Huntington, both civilian and British soldiers. The Culper spy ring is another favorite topic, especially with the television series Turn. The producers have taken considerable dramatic license with that series. That's an understatement. Woodhull, Nancy Strong may have been involved, though unclear, but she was not romantically involved with Abram Woodhull, as Turn would have it. Anna Strong was in her late 30s. She had been married for 18 years at the time of the war, probably had 6 of her 12 children with her, while her husband was a refugee in Connecticut. The traditional story is that Anna Strong told those coming from Connecticut where to land by a code of how she, yeah, we got it, okay, put handkerchiefs and petticoats on her clothesline. I'm going to read you some verses written by Abigail Halsey of Southampton in the 1940s, who has a dozen poems on the Culper spies. This one on Anna Strong. Anna Strong took down her wash that mild September night. She saw that Caleb Brewster's boat had just come into sight. There was no light for her to mark the cove he entered in the dark. When morning came and Woodhull looked across the creek again, he saw the old black petticoat still tossing in the rain. Beside it, some white underwear, and handkerchiefs were hanging there. 1, 2, 3, 4, he breathed. By Jove, so Brewster's boat is in our cove. There's no real hard evidence for the clothesline, despite the accounts published in the Long Island Forum by a family descendant, Kate Strong. But that's our main evidence. One documented record does refer to a woman aiding the spy ring in Setauket. That and the location of the Strong house provides some evidence for Nancy Strong's participation, though the story has probably been embellished and romanticized. Philadelphia has Betsy Ross, Long Island has Nancy Strong, part of our legendaries and folklore. I'm including this Matinacock Quaker Meeting House as a reminder of Quakers being in the forefront of anti-slavery activities. In 1771, 1 in 6 Long Islanders was African American, 17% of the population. Most of them were enslaved. Queens County, which, as I said, then included present-day Nassau, had the largest number, more than 2,000 African Americans. Kings County, Brooklyn, had the highest percentage, 32%. Suffolk, the lowest, 11%. Slightly more than half of those African Americans were enslaved. And slavery on Long Island, with a few exceptions, was usually on a smaller scale than in the South. Many, but not all, middling families had 1 or 2, or perhaps 5 or 6 enslaved blacks who worked side by side with their owners. A few of the wealthy, large landowners had more than 10 slaves. By 1775, Quakers were expected to have freed their slaves. They could not be in good standing in the faith if they had not. And they became in the forefront of the anti-slavery activities. Quakers' pacifist views meant that they were in a difficult situation during the war, but we'll hear about them in another session today. We now have a remarkable story of a young enslaved black woman who escaped with the British forces only to be re-enslaved, but eventually rescued by Robert Townsend, Culper Jr., and another guise. We'll be hearing about enslaved women in the next session. The Daughters of the American Revolution, the DAR, have preserved stories of Long Island women, and several of their Long Island chapters, in fact, are named for local women associated with the Revolutionary War. There's a Anna Smith Strong chapter in Setauket. Edna Yeager and William Halsey have written about incidents during the war. Some of their vignettes may be romanticized and exaggerated, but they probably have an element of truth. Many describe what I like to call domestic resistance by the women, obviously. And one of the most famous is by Mrs. Joseph Osborne. Last, we don't know her first name. She was cooking a berry pudding, or in other accounts, it was a Indian pudding made of corn and molasses. And there were British soldiers nearby who came up and saying, "We're just in time," and demanded the pudding. Fanny Elkins of Brooklyn told the story in verse. I'll quote the ending of it. "Oh, no, you're not," she made reply, then seized the boiling pot. Ran with it through the open door, pudding and all, down the hill, and left it in the sand, amid the curses loud and deep of all the hungry band. The place and tale are widely known, fresh is the legend still, and all East Hampton villagers are proud of Pudding Hill. Now, it may be legend, as the poem says, but there is a Pudding Hill Street in East Hampton today. Southold historian Augustus Griffin, in the mid-19th century, in his journal, he recorded the activities of several women during the war, mainly on the North Fork, and I reprinted several of those in my women's Journeys on Long Island. And here's the account of one that I have in my book, The Women in Long Island's Past. British soldiers returning from a raid to Connecticut in 1781 landed at Orion Point, where Betsy Vale's husband, Jeremiah, operated a tavern. The Vales saw the soldiers approaching the house. They had 2 large barrels of Applejack, hard cider, in the cellar. Betsy did not want drunken soldiers wrecking her home, so she went down, knocked out the stoppers, and tipped the barrels over to empty them. After tying up Mr. Vale, the soldiers unsuccessfully searched everywhere for something to drink, as they put it. When they went down into the cellar, they discovered that Betsy had successfully thwarted them. The ground had drank the liquor and was still sober. They confronted Mrs. Vale and demanded her reasons for depriving them of refreshments. She very deliberately replied, and I quote, "You are the enemies of my country. I have nothing for you. You have no business here. Threats nor oaths don't alarm me. If I have done wrong, I am responsible to my husband, not to you. You will not eat or drink in this house if I can prevent it." She expected violence, but they left the house very soon after, muttering curses for her devotion and fortitude. Another incident involved Joanne Corwin, who lived in this house in Mattatuck. When a British officer came and demanded grain from her, she seized her husband's gun and they soon retreated. Such stories usually are preserved in family and oral accounts recorded by later historians. Again, part of Long Island's history and folklore. Another quite different story is Prudence Punderson, whom I only learned about recently. She was a Connecticut refugee, and we don't usually think of that. She came to Long Island 1778 after their home had been wrecked by the Patriots, confiscated the property. They lived in Preston, Connecticut, north of New London. And her father fled first to a British ship in the harbor, and then after he went to Rhode Island, and then finally to England for a while. The rest of the family, mother and 8 children, became refugees on Long Island. Prudence was 20 years old, the oldest of the 8. The family crossed the Sound to Sag Harbor and were assisted in finding a place to live with another family in East Hampton initially. The Reverend Buell, the Presbyterian minister in East Hampton, helped them there. He was originally from Connecticut. He may have known Prudence's grandfather, who was a Anglican priest in Connecticut. And what you see on the screen is Prudence's silk on linen embroidery. This is the best. There's a whole collection of her embroidery that she did on Long Island during the occupation as a refugee. She called this the first, second, and last scene of mourning, of mortality, excuse me. She is seated in the center. There's her initials, PP, are at some point there, so it's a self-portrait, as it were. One of her young siblings is in the cradle on your right, and she's attended by a young black woman watching the infant. On the left, there is a coffin, 3 stages. She survived during the war, but she had what she called a gathering on her breast. Whether that was cancer or not, she had it cut out. She survived that. She had been engaged to a cousin who, before she left Connecticut, and her father was a commissary for the British on Long Island and in New York City. And there's a letter from him that survives. She had been engaged to Dr. Timothy Rossiter, who was serving in the Continental Army. Remember I said it was a civil war. Families were sometimes divided. And Prudence married Timothy at the end of the war, married in East Hampton. The East Hampton Historical Society has her wedding dress, I understand. And she and Timothy then went across the Sound to Connecticut. And about a year or so later, she had a baby girl, but Prudence died within 2 months of the birth. So not a happy story. Connecticut Museum in Hartford has her embroideries and her papers. The British occupation was most difficult for residents during the winter months, when there was usually no fighting and soldiers were everywhere on the island. One estimate is that at the peak of occupation, 1 in 6 residents on Long Island was a British or Hessian soldier. Some quartered in private homes, including Raynham Hall. which is now a historic house museum in Oyster Bay. Sarah, or Sally Townsend, was 18 years old when Colonel John Simcoe selected the Townsend House for his headquarters in 1778. And incidentally, Simcoe was not such a villain as Tern portrays him. Young officers in the Townsend home flirted with Sally and her sisters, who enjoyed the masculine company. And one soldier scratched on the windows that you see on the screen, Miss A.T., the most accomplished young lady in Oyster Bay. A was Audrey, Sally's older sister. Another soldier wrote on another pane, the adorable Miss Sally Townsend. Colonel Simcoe sent Sally a valentine in 1779, which reads in part, "To you, my heart, I must resign, oh, choose me for your valentine." This is a transcript. The original valentine has not survived. But as the Raynham Hall example indicates, British and Hessian soldiers were quartered in houses or barns and elsewhere on private property throughout Long Island during the occupation. The soldiers could and sometimes did bring smallpox or other diseases. Women often had to provide food, and certainly the soldiers disrupted household routines. They were supposed to be paid by American officials for prisoners, by British for their forces, but often it was in IOUs or in depreciating currency. And those IOUs were often never collected, even at the end of hostilities when they were supposed to have been. The presence of soldiers in an area also brought the fear and reality of rape and venereal disease. Although it is impossible to estimate numbers because many rapes were never reported, investigations by the Continental Congress indicated that they occurred on a large scale. John Stout, in his study of the Revolution in Suffolk County, reports, and I quote, "British soldiers attacked pregnant women, the elderly, and girls as young as 13 years old, and sometimes gang raped their victims over the course of several days. Loyalist troops also committed rape. Then as now, rapes often were not reported or documented. As historian Linda Grant DePaul has observed, when, quote, "Rape was one of the grievances that made patriots out of neutrals, for American women took it more seriously than the British officers." Women usually do take it more seriously. One British officer wrote in a letter regarding rapes on Staten Island, again quoting, "The fair nymphs of the Isle," Staten Island in this case, "are in wonderful tribulation, as the fresh meat our men have got here has made them riotous as satyrs from a girl cannot step into the bushes to pluck a rose without running the most imminent risk of being ravished. And they are so little accustomed to these rigorous methods that they don't bear them with the proper resignation. And of consequence, we have the most entertaining court-martials every day." An incident from Noel Gish's Smithtown history, when widow Ruth Blydenberg encountered 30 British officers at her door in this home, demanding food and drink. She replied, and quote, "Lordy me, don't come to a poor lone widow. Go over to Nettus's yonder. There's plenty there." End of quote. So they left for the Epinetus Smith Tavern, which is preserved today in Smithtown Historical Society complex. Again, another example of domestic resistance. Another incident that occurred early in the war, today's Glen Cove, involved British Lieutenant James Keating and Patty Pearsall. They fell in love. However, he was ordered to return to England. And before he left, however, he wrote on the window of his bedroom, again quoting, "The dear and lovely Patty Pearsall, joy of my heart and comfort of my eyes, the only care and business of my youth," end of quote. Alas, his ship was lost at sea, no survivors, and the news broke Patty's heart. The window, however, was given to the North Shore Historical Museum in Glen Cove a decade ago, and I hope that it will be in their 250th exhibit this year. Some Long Island women married British soldiers, often those quartered in their homes during the occupation or nearby, and a number of such weddings took place on Long Island. But some young ladies were foiled, like Miss H., whose family opposed her marriage to a soldier in the Highlander Regiment. Just before the British were to leave, hoping to leave with the troops, she dressed as a soldier. But her father came, found her, took her home. Alas, I don't know the ending and whether Miss H. and her sweetheart ever did marry. The British forces commandeered wood, livestock, hay, and food, sometimes giving receipts, but often not, and that meant less food and fewer resources for the families. It was the women who had to cope with the shortages. Women and children suffered together with the men living on the island when the British soldiers plundered, pillaged, and terrorized the civilian population. They seized cattle, grain, and wagons. They cut down trees, took fences for firewood, and desecrated many of the Presbyterian churches. Most Presbyterians then were patriots, even Quaker meeting houses. Quakers were neutral. Anglican or Episcopal churches usually were spared. They were the loyalists, of course, but even loyalists were not immune from abuse by the occupying troops. British martial law did not maintain law and order, whether among the soldiers, marauding patriots, or robbers who pretended to be patriots or whaleboat warriors. Historian Silas Wood, writing in 1824, summarized the impact of the occupation. And I'm quoting here, "The army was a sanctuary for crimes and robbery, and the grossest offenses by civilians were atoned by enlistment, which shielded them from punishment." Wood wrote that the officers, again, compelled the inhabitants to do all kinds of personal services, to work in their forts, to go with their teams or foraging parties, and transport their cannon, ammunition, provisions, and baggage. The officers seized and occupied the best rooms in the homes of the inhabitants. They compelled them to furnish blankets and food for the soldiers and hay and grain for their horses. They impressed their horses and wagons for the use of the army. They took away their cattle, sheep, hogs, and poultry, and seized without ceremony and without any compensation or for such only as they chose to make for their own use, and whatever they desired to gratify their wants or wishes. The incidents I've mentioned are samplings from a very difficult time. As historian Joseph Tiedemann has concluded, The British lost the political struggle, and many Long Islanders who had been neutral, apolitical, or even loyalists at first, became patriots after British misconduct against civilians during the occupation, which was exacerbated by officers profiteering at the expense of Long Islanders. Go on. I'm given the signal to end, so I will end there. You're only missing a minute or so, and that extends beyond the revolution. Thank you for your attention.